The sound of glass shattering echoed through the empty penthouse as Jin-Woo Park collapsed to his knees. Bankruptcy papers scattered like fallen snow across the marble floor. Blood trickled from his split lip where he had bitten down too hard, trying to contain the scream that had been building in his chest for 48 hours. The city lights of Seoul blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, mocking him with their brilliance while his world crumbled into ash. His phone had stopped ringing hours ago. The last call had been from his lawyer, delivering the final blow with clinical precision. Everything was gone. The tech empire he had built from nothing, the reputation that had taken 20 years to establish, the future he had mapped out with such careful calculation. All of it swept away by the betrayal of the two people he had trusted most. Amara Williams pushed her cleaning cart through the service entrance of the park tower, humming softly under her breath as she always did during the lonely hours of her night shift. The security guard barely looked up from his phone as she badged in, her presence as invisible to him as it was to most people in this gleaming monument to wealth. She preferred it that way. Invisibility had kept her safe through 3 jobs and countless encounters with people who looked right through her. The elevator carried her silently to the penthouse level, where she was scheduled to clean the CEO's suite. Amara had been working this building for 6 months, but she had never seen the man who lived at the top. The other cleaners whispered about him sometimes, calling him brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. A tech genius who had revolutionized smartphone technology before his 30th birthday. A man who lived alone in a palace that could house 50 families. I wonder where you're watching this story unfold tonight. Maybe you're in your own quiet space, thinking about the people who have appeared in your life when you needed them most. Have you ever had someone unexpected change everything for you? Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from, because sometimes the most powerful connections happen when we least expect them. The penthouse door stood slightly ajar, which struck Amara as odd. Rich people were paranoid about security, in her experience. She knocked gently, calling out her standard greeting, but heard only silence in response. Protocol dictated that she should leave and return tomorrow, but something in the quality of that silence made her pause. It felt heavy, charged with the kind of desperation she recognized from her own darkest moments. Amara pushed the door open carefully and stepped into a scene that looked like a tornado had torn through a museum. Furniture overturned, papers everywhere, and broken glass catching the city lights like scattered diamonds. In the center of it all, a man sat crumpled against a leather sofa, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained, his dark hair hanging in his eyes. He looked up when she entered, and Amara felt her breath catch. Even in his destroyed state, Jin-Woo Park was striking. High cheekbones, intelligent eyes that currently held more pain than she had ever seen in another human being, and hands that shook as he tried to gather the papers around him. This was not the intimidating tech mogul she had imagined. This was a man who had been broken by something bigger than himself. "Sir," she said softly, setting down her card and approaching him slowly, as she might approach a wounded animal. "Are you hurt?" Jin-Woo stared at her for a long moment, his mind struggling to process her presence. A cleaning woman, young and beautiful, with skin like polished amber and eyes that held genuine concern instead of the calculated interest he was used to seeing. She wore a simple uniform and comfortable shoes, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Everything about her was real in a way that suddenly made him realize how fake his entire world had been. "I am fine," he said, the lie catching in his throat. The words came out in accented English, formal and careful despite his obvious distress. Amara crouched down beside him, ignoring the glass that crunched under her knees. She had cleaned up enough broken things in her life to recognize when someone was lying about being fine. Blood stained his knuckles where he had punched something, probably a wall, and his breathing was too shallow, too controlled. "No, sir, you are not," she replied gently. "When did you last eat something?" The question was so practical, so removed from the magnitude of his losses, that Jin-Woo almost laughed. When had he last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time had become meaningless since Elena had walked out with half his assets and Marcus had disappeared with the other half. Food seemed like a luxury for people who still had futures. "I do not remember," he admitted, and the honesty surprised him. Amara stood and walked to his kitchen, moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to taking care of others. She found bread and made him a simple sandwich, filling a glass with water and carrying both back to where he sat. Her movements were graceful and unhurried, as if sitting on the floor of a destroyed penthouse with a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. My grandmother always said that problems look smaller after you eat something, she told him, offering the plate. Maybe not smaller, but more manageable. Jin Woo accepted the sandwich with hands that trembled slightly. The bread was plain white, the kind he would never have chosen, but when he bit into it, it tasted like the most wonderful thing he had ever eaten. Not because of the food itself, but because someone had cared enough to make it for him. When had anyone last done something for him without wanting something in return? Why are you helping me? He asked, studying her face for signs of ulterior motive. In his world, kindness always came with a price tag. Amara sat back on her heels, considering his question seriously. Because you look like I felt 3 years ago when my grandmother had her heart attack, and I thought I was going to lose everything that mattered. Sometimes we all need someone to sit with us in the dark for a while. The simple honesty of her answer hit him harder than any of the devastating phone calls he had received. Here was someone who had faced real loss, not the abstract financial ruin that was destroying him, but the potential death of someone she loved. Yet she was here, in his wreckage, offering comfort to a stranger. As Jin Woo ate the sandwich she had made, Amara began quietly cleaning around him, not the rushed, impersonal cleaning he was used to seeing, but careful attention to his space. She righted furniture, swept up glass, organized papers without reading them. Her presence was soothing in a way he could not define, like cool water on burned skin. "What is your name?" he asked when he had finished eating. "Amara Williams." "And you are Jin Woo Park," she replied, surprising him with her knowledge. "I have seen your picture in the business magazines when I clean the lobby. You know who I am, but you are still here. Why?" Amara paused in her work, meeting his gaze directly. "Money does not change how much it hurts when your world falls apart, Mr. Park. Pain is pain, whether you are wearing a $1,000 suit or cleaning one." The truth of her words settled over him like a blanket. For the first time in days, the crushing weight in his chest eased slightly. This woman, whose name he had not known an hour ago, understood something that his business partners, his fiancée, his entire social circle had missed. Behind all his success and wealth, he was still just a human being who could be hurt. As the night stretched on, Amara continued her quiet work, and Jin Woo found himself talking. Not the careful, strategic communication he was known for in boardrooms, but real conversation about real things. She told him about her grandmother, about working 3 jobs to pay for medical bills, about dreams deferred but not abandoned. He told her about the betrayal, about watching everything he had built disappear in a matter of hours, about the terrifying realization that he had no idea who he was without his company. When dawn began to lighten the sky over Seoul, Amara finished cleaning and prepared to leave. Jin Woo watched her pack her supplies with something approaching panic. The thought of being alone again, of facing another day in this empty space without her steady presence, felt unbearable. "Will you come back tonight?" he asked, and heard the vulnerability in his own voice. Amara smiled, the expression transforming her tired face into something luminous. "I clean this building every night, Mr. Park. I will be here." As she left, Jin Woo remained on the floor where she had found him, but something fundamental had shifted. The papers around him were still bankruptcy documents. His phone still held dozens of messages from angry investors. His reflection in the darkened windows still showed a man who had lost everything. But for the first time in 48 hours, he was not alone with his pain. Someone had seen him at his worst and had chosen to stay. Someone had offered kindness without expectation of return. Someone had treated him like a human being rather than a symbol of success or failure. In the growing daylight, Jin Woo began to pick up the pieces of his life, but now he was not trying to rebuild what he had lost. He was trying to become someone worthy of the grace that Amara Williams had shown him in his darkest hour. He was trying to become someone who might deserve the quiet strength she had shared so freely. The man who had collapsed in despair 12 hours earlier was gone. In his place sat someone who had remembered what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, by another human being. And that, Jin Woo realized as he held the empty plate that had contained her simple sandwich, might be worth more than everything he had lost. The next evening, Amara arrived at the penthouse carrying a thermos and a small paper bag that smelled like home cooking. She found Jinwoo exactly where she had left him, still sitting among the scattered papers, though he had managed to shower and change clothes. His hair was damp, and he wore a simple white shirt and dark pants instead of the destroyed suit from the night before. "I brought you some real food," she said, setting the thermos down beside him. "Grandmother Rose made extra soup tonight. She always makes too much when she is worried about something." Jinwoo looked up at her with something between gratitude and confusion. "You told your grandmother about me?" "I told her I met someone who was having the worst day of his life. She said soup fixes most things, and what it does not fix, kindness will help with." Amara unscrewed the thermos cap, releasing the rich aroma of vegetables and herbs into the sterile air of the penthouse. It was humble food, the kind his cook would never have prepared, but it smelled like comfort. "You should not be spending your money on me," Jinwoo said, though his stomach responded to the scent with embarrassing enthusiasm. He had eaten nothing since the sandwich she made him, his appetite buried under layers of shame and shock. "It is not about money, Mr. Park. It is about being human." Amara ladled the soup into the thermos cap, transforming it into a makeshift bowl. "Besides, Grandmother Rose would never forgive me if I let someone go hungry when we have enough to share." As Jinwoo ate the soup, feeling warmth spread through his body for the first time in days, his mind drifted backward to the moment when everything began to unravel. 72 hours earlier, he had been standing in his office on the 42nd floor, reviewing quarterly projections with his business partner Marcus Thompson. The numbers had been exceptional, better than they had projected even in their most optimistic forecasts. Marcus had seemed excited, almost giddy, as he presented the figures. They were discussing expansion plans, talking about opening offices in 3 new countries, when Jinwoo's assistant had buzzed to say that Elena Chun was here to see him. His fiancée rarely visited the office, preferring to meet him at restaurants or social events where their relationship could serve her networking purposes. Elena had entered wearing the red dress he had bought her in Paris, her smile bright and practiced. She kissed his cheek with the same calculated affection she always displayed in front of business associates. But something in her eyes had felt different. "Colder. Darling, I need to discuss something important with you," she had said, her voice carrying an odd formality. "Marcus, would you mind giving us some privacy?" Marcus had left with unusual haste, Jinwoo remembered now, thinking back to details that had seemed insignificant at the time. His business partner had avoided eye contact and practically rushed from the room. How had Jinwoo missed such obvious signs? Elena had waited until the door closed before dropping her mask entirely. "I am leaving you, Jinwoo. The wedding is cancelled. My lawyers will be in touch about the financial arrangements." The words had hit him like physical blows. "Financial arrangements? What are you talking about?" "The prenuptial agreement you signed gives me half of everything acquired during our engagement period. Since we have been engaged for 2 years, that includes the patents for the new smartphone technology, the subsidiary companies, and most of your liquid assets." Elena had delivered this information with the efficiency of a business presentation. Jinwoo had stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You are stealing from me? I am protecting my investment. You see, darling, Marcus and I have been planning this for quite some time. He has been documenting every business decision, every financial move, building a case that you have been mismanaging company funds. Between his testimony and the legal claims I can make, we will walk away with everything that matters." The memory of that conversation still made Jinwoo feel physically sick. The woman he had planned to marry, the business partner he had trusted like a brother, had been systematically destroying him while pretending to love and support him. "Mr. Park?" Amara's gentle voice brought him back to the present. "You look like you are somewhere very painful." Jinwoo set down the empty thermos cap, realizing he had consumed the entire portion without tasting it. "I was remembering how this happened, how I could have been so blind." Amara resumed her cleaning around him, her movements creating a soothing rhythm in the too quiet penthouse. "People who want to hurt us are very good at pretending to care," she said softly. "It is not blindness to trust someone you love. It is hope. How can you be so understanding about betrayal?" Jinwoo asked, watching her work. In the warm light of the table lamps, her profile showed strength carved by experience, a kind of beauty that had nothing to do with symmetry and everything to do with character. Because I learned the hard way that holding on to anger hurts you more than it hurts the people who wronged you. Amara straightened a throw pillow, her hands gentle even with inanimate objects. My father sold our house when I was 17, told me it was to pay for my college education. Instead, he took the money and left town with his girlfriend. Left me and Grandmother Rose with nothing. Jean Wu felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that his pain was not unique, not special. You were 17? Grandmother Rose had just been diagnosed with diabetes. Her medications cost more than I could make working part-time after school. I spent 2 years being angry at my father, thinking about revenge, planning what I would say if I ever saw him again. Amara moved to dust a bookshelf, running the cloth carefully along each spine. All that anger was just keeping me stuck in that moment when he left. It was not until I forgave him that I could move forward. But how do you forgive someone who destroys your life? Jean Wu's voice carried a rawness that surprised him. He was not used to revealing vulnerability to anyone, let alone a woman he had known for less than 24 hours. You forgive them so you can save your own life, Amara replied simply. Forgiveness is not about them deserving it. It is about you deserving peace. As she worked, Amara began humming again, the same melody she had hummed the night before. It was something gospel-influenced but gentle, a tune that seemed to wrap around the harsh edges of his broken world and soften them. Jean Wu found himself listening to the sound of her voice rather than the chaos in his own mind. What song is that? He asked. Something Grandmother Rose used to sing when I was little and scared of thunderstorms. She said music was prayers you could hear. Amara smiled as she straightened some papers on his desk. I guess I still hum it when I am trying to calm something down. It helps, Jean Wu admitted. The singing. It makes this place feel less empty. Amara paused in her work, studying his face with those perceptive eyes. When did you last have people in your life who were not trying to get something from you? The question hit deeper than Jean Wu expected. Years, he realized. Maybe since college, before he had money and power to offer. Every relationship in his adult life had been transactional to some degree. Even with Elena, he had always known that his success was part of his appeal to her. I cannot remember, he said honestly. That is the saddest thing I have heard all week, Amara replied. And I work in a hospital 3 mornings a week, so I hear a lot of sad things. You work in a hospital too? Jean Wu was beginning to understand the deep exhaustion he saw in her face, the careful way she moved, as if conserving energy. Hospital housekeeping, the diner downtown for lunch shifts, and building cleaning at night. Grandmother Rose needs medications that insurance does not cover completely, and I am saving for school. Amara said this matter-of-factly, without self-pity or martyrdom. What do you want to study? Jean Wu found himself genuinely curious about her dreams, something that felt foreign after years of conversations focused on profit margins and market share. Social work. I want to help people navigate the system when they are in crisis. Too many people fall through the cracks because they do not know what resources are available or how to access them. Amara's voice carried a passion that lit up her entire face. You would be good at that, Jean Wu said, and meant it completely. You have a gift for seeing what people need. Amara finished her cleaning and prepared to leave, but this time Jean Wu did not feel the same desperation at her departure. Somehow, knowing she would return tomorrow made the prospect of another day feel possible rather than unbearable. Thank you, he said as she gathered her supplies. For the soup. For listening. For treating me like a person instead of a problem to be solved. Everyone deserves to be seen for who they are, not what they have lost, Amara replied. You are more than your worst day, Mr. Park. Try to remember that. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Jean Wu realized that for the first time since his world collapsed, he was thinking about someone else's struggles instead of drowning in his own. Amara Williams was sacrificing her education, working herself to exhaustion, caring for her grandmother, yet she had taken time to care for him. She was building a life from nothing, with grace and determination that made his own self-pity feel small and temporary. He looked around the penthouse that had once represented the pinnacle of his success, and saw it differently now. It was not a palace or a prison. It was just a place. The real wealth, Jean Wu was beginning to understand, was not in the things he had accumulated, but in connections like the one he was forming with a woman who had every reason to ignore his suffering, but chose compassion instead. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ask her more about her dreams. Tonight, He would sleep better than he had in days, carried into rest by the memory of her humming and the warmth of food prepared with care. He was still a man who had lost everything, but he was no longer a man who had nothing left to live for. On the third night, Jin-woo waited for Amara with something he had never offered anyone before: help without strings attached. He had spent the day researching medical costs and insurance gaps, using his remaining business contacts to understand exactly what kind of financial burden Amara was carrying. The numbers had staggered him. When she arrived with another thermos and that tired smile that somehow managed to light up the entire penthouse, he was ready. "I want to help with your grandmother's medical expenses," he said without preamble, watching her face carefully. "Not as charity, but as repayment for what you have done for me." Amara set down her cleaning supplies slowly, her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked almost like fear. "Mr. Park, I appreciate the thought, but I cannot accept that kind of help from you." "Why not?" The intensity of her refusal caught him off guard. "You are killing yourself working 3 jobs. I have connections with medical billing specialists, pharmaceutical company assistance programs. I could make some calls." "Because I have heard that story before." Amara's voice carried a hardness he had not heard from her before, a protective edge that spoke of painful experience. "Rich men who want to help always want something in return. Always." "I do not want anything from you," Jin-woo said, but even as he spoke the words, he realized they were not entirely true. He did want something from her, but it was not what she feared. He wanted her presence, her wisdom, her quiet strength. He wanted to be worthy of the grace she had shown him. They all say that at first. Amara began cleaning with more force than usual, her movements sharp with old anger. "When I was 19, there was a man who came into the hospital where I worked. Rich businessman, just like you. Saw how hard I was working, how worried I was about Grandmother Rose's bills." Jin-woo felt something cold settle in his stomach as he watched her scrub a spotless countertop with unnecessary vigor. He offered to help with everything: medical bills, my school tuition, even a better apartment for Grandmother Rose. All he wanted, he said, was to help a deserving young woman achieve her dreams. Amara's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut glass. "What he actually wanted was for me to be grateful enough to sleep with him." The words hit Jin-woo like a physical blow. "I am not that man." That is what he said too. Amara stopped cleaning and faced him directly, her eyes blazing with a fury that had been banked but never extinguished. "For 6 months, he paid for everything. I thought I had met an angel. Then one night, he came to collect what he thought I owed him. When I said no, he threatened to stop the payments. Told me Grandmother Rose would die if I was too proud to show proper appreciation." Jin-woo felt sick. "What did you do?" "I chose my grandmother's life over my pride. For 3 months, I let him believe he was getting what he paid for while I figured out another way. Saved every penny, found additional work, researched assistance programs he had never told me about. The day I paid him back every cent, I told him exactly what I thought of him and his help." The story explained so much about Amara's careful independence, her wariness beneath the kindness. Jin-woo understood now that her help came despite past betrayals, not because she was naive about human nature. "I would never," he began, but she cut him off. "You do not understand, Mr. Park. You are sitting in a penthouse worth more than most people see in a lifetime, even broke. You live in a world where everything has a price, where people are investments. I cannot risk becoming another transaction in your portfolio." Her words stung because they contained enough truth to draw blood. His entire adult life had been built on transactions, negotiations, cost-benefit analyses applied to human relationships. Even his engagement to Elena had been partly strategic, combining their social and business networks. "What if I prove that my intentions are different?" Jin-woo asked quietly. "How could you possibly do that?" "Let me work for you. At the diner. Show me what your life is actually like before I try to change it." Amara stared at him as if he had suggested they fly to the moon together. "You want to work at Murphy's Diner? You, who probably has never cleared a table in your life." "I have never done many things that might be worth learning." Jin-woo met her gaze steadily. "If I am going to rebuild my life, maybe I should understand what real work looks like." The next evening, Amara led him through the service entrance of Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour establishment that served construction workers, hospital staff, and anyone else who needed food during the forgotten hours of the night. The kitchen was cramped and steamy, filled with the sounds of sizzling oil and shouted orders. The smell was entirely different from the sterile perfection of his penthouse. Grease and coffee and honest sweat. Murphy, the owner, looked Jin Woo up and down with the skepticism of a man who had seen every type of person stumble through his doors. You sure this pretty boy can handle real work, Amara? He will learn or he will quit, Amara replied pragmatically. Either way, we need the extra hands tonight. Jin Woo spent the next 6 hours discovering muscles he had forgotten he possessed. Clearing tables, washing dishes, refilling coffee cups for customers who looked through him as if he were invisible. His hands, soft from years of keyboard work, developed blisters within the first hour. His back ached from constant movement. His feet, accustomed to Italian leather shoes and cushioned office floors, screamed in protest against the worn work boots Amara had brought him. But something else happened as the night wore on. The rhythm of the work became meditative. The grateful nod from a tired nurse, when he refilled her coffee, felt more meaningful than any board meeting he had ever attended. When a homeless man counted out exact change for a cup of coffee and a slice of pie, Jin Woo found himself adding extra cream and a second slice without being asked. Amara worked with an efficiency that amazed him, somehow managing to serve 6 tables while keeping track of every customer's needs and preferences. She remembered that the construction foreman took his coffee black with 2 sugars, that the elderly woman in booth 3 was diabetic and preferred artificial sweetener, that the young father working double shifts needed his food packed to go so he could eat in his car between jobs. Near dawn, when the last customer had left and they were cleaning up, Jin Woo realized he felt more satisfied than he had after closing any business deal. How do you do it? He asked Amara as they wiped down tables. How do you remember everyone? I pay attention to what people need instead of what they can give me, she replied simply. Makes it easier to care about them. The observation was so casually devastating that Jin Woo stopped wiping mid-motion. In his business world, every interaction had been about extracting value, market intelligence, networking opportunities, competitive advantages. When had he last looked at someone and wondered what they needed rather than what they could provide? Murphy paid them in cash at the end of the shift, counting out bills with hands stained by decades of honest work. Jin Woo stared at the money in his palm, probably less than he used to spend on a single lunch, but earned through effort that left him exhausted and oddly proud. Not bad for a pretty boy, Murphy conceded as they prepared to leave. You can come back if you want. Walking through the early morning streets with Amara, Jin Woo felt lighter than he had in years. His body ached. His clothes smelled like grease and coffee, and he was probably earning less per hour than his former assistant had made per minute. But the work had meant something. The people had been real, their needs concrete and immediate. Come up with me, Amara said as they reached a modest apartment building in a neighborhood his GPS had marked as dangerous. Grandmother Rose will want to meet the man who has been eating her soup. Amara's apartment was tiny, maybe a quarter the size of his walk-in closet, but it felt more like home than anywhere he had ever lived. Pictures covered every available surface: family gatherings, graduation photos, church events. The furniture was old but lovingly maintained, and everything smelled like the candles that Grandmother Rose lit during her morning prayers. Grandmother Rose herself was a revelation. Tiny and elegant despite her age, with silver hair braided into an intricate crown and eyes that missed nothing. She looked Jin Woo up and down with frank assessment before nodding approvingly. So you are the lost soul my granddaughter has been feeding, she said, her voice carrying the music of decades spent in church choirs. Sit down, child. You look like you could use some real breakfast. As Grandmother Rose bustled around the small kitchen, preparing eggs and biscuits with the same care Amara brought to everything she did, Jin Woo found himself relaxing in a way he had forgotten was possible. There were no agendas here, no hidden motives, no careful positioning for advantage. Just a family making space for someone who needed it. Tell me about this diner work, Grandmother Rose said as they ate. Amara says you took to it like you were born to serve people instead of ordering them around. It felt meaningful, Jin Woo said honestly. Like what I was doing mattered to someone besides myself. Good, she nodded approvingly. A man who has never served others cannot understand his own value. You can build all the companies you want, but if you have never looked into someone's eyes and seen their gratitude for simple kindness, you have never really lived. The wisdom in her words settled over Jin Woo like warmth from the morning sun streaming through their small window. He thought about his old life, the endless meetings and strategic decisions that had consumed his days. Had any of it actually mattered? Had he ever truly helped anyone? I think I understand why Amara is the way she is, he said, watching his hostess refill his coffee cup for the third time. She learned generosity from watching you. Child, generosity cannot be learned, Grandmother Rose replied. It can only be remembered. Everyone is born knowing how to care for others. The world just makes us forget. After breakfast, Amara walked Jin Woo to the bus stop, and he realized he did not want to return to his empty penthouse. Here, in this small apartment with its second-hand furniture and overflowing love, he had felt more at home in 3 hours than he had in 2 years of living alone above the city. Thank you, he said as the bus approached. Not just for the meal, but for letting me see what I have been missing. What have you been missing? Amara asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. Family, Jin Woo said simply. Purpose. The feeling that what I do with my life actually matters to someone. The bus pulled up, but Jin Woo hesitated before boarding. Would it be possible for me to come back? To the diner, I mean. I would like to keep working there. Murphy would probably appreciate the help, Amara said carefully. But why would you want to do that when you could rebuild your empire? Because I am not sure I want my empire back, Jin Woo admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. At least not the way it was. Maybe there are better things to build. As the bus carried him back toward his penthouse, Jin Woo stared out the window at a city he was seeing with new eyes. In a few hours, he had learned more about human nature and genuine satisfaction than in years of business success. Amara and Grandmother Rose had shown him what wealth actually looked like when it was measured in relationships and service rather than profit margins. For the first time since his world had collapsed, Jin Woo was excited about the future. Not because he thought he could reclaim what he had lost, but because he was beginning to imagine building something entirely different. Something that would make Grandmother Rose proud. Something that would prove to Amara that not all wealthy men were predators. Something that would allow him to wake up each morning knowing his life had purpose beyond accumulation. He was still a man who had lost everything, but he was beginning to understand that everything he had lost might not have been worth keeping. 3 weeks into his new life, Jin Woo sat in a coffee shop near Murphy's diner with his laptop open, making phone calls that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. Instead of negotiating hostile takeovers or maximizing shareholder value, he was calling former business contacts to discuss employment opportunities for people who had never owned suits or attended networking events. Marcus from the diner needs steady work with health insurance, he explained to his former supplier relationships manager. He has been working construction for 15 years, but his back is giving out. He knows logistics better than most college graduates I have met. The conversation required patience. His contact kept asking what Jin Woo was getting out of these arrangements, unable to understand motivation that was not immediately profitable. But Jin Woo persisted, leveraging relationships built over years of mutual benefit to create opportunities for people who had never had advocates in corporate boardrooms. By afternoon, he had secured interviews for 6 people from Amara's community, real jobs with actual benefits, not the exploitative positions that kept them trapped in cycles of poverty. As he closed his laptop, Jin Woo felt a satisfaction deeper than any successful product launch had ever provided. Amara found him there when her hospital shift ended, still glowing with the quiet pride of work that mattered. She slid into the booth across from him, noting the stack of business cards and contact information scattered across the table. What have you been doing? She asked, though her smile suggested she already suspected. Putting my network to better use than I ever did when I had money, Jin Woo replied. Mrs. Patterson from Booth 6 has a son who just graduated from community college with an IT certificate. I found him a position at a software company that will train him properly instead of exploiting his desperation. Amara stared at him with an expression he could not read. You called in favors for people you barely know? They are not strangers, Jin Woo said, realizing as he spoke that it was true. They are part of your world, which makes them part of mine now. Besides, I am discovering that helping people feels better than acquiring things ever did. The transformation in his priorities still amazed him. A month ago, his phone calls had been about market domination and competitive advantage. Now he spent his mornings researching social impact business models, and his afternoons working alongside people who had never heard his name but valued his presence. "I have an idea," Amara said, leaning forward with the kind of excitement he remembered feeling during his first successful product development. "What if you started a company that did this professionally, connecting underemployed people with businesses that actually need their skills?" Jin Woo felt electricity run through him at the suggestion. A tech platform focused on social mobility rather than profit extraction. Employment matching based on potential rather than pedigree. It was everything his old company could have been if he had not been blinded by wealth accumulation. "I still have some connections who might invest in something like that," he said slowly, his mind already racing through possibilities. "Especially if I can prove the concept works with pilot programs." "You mean we can prove it works?" Amara corrected. "This was my idea too, and I know the community needs better than any investor report could tell you." The word we sent warmth through Jin Woo's chest. Partnership based on complementary strengths rather than calculated advantage. Amara understood people in ways his business education had never taught him, while he had technical skills and connections she could leverage for maximum impact. They spent the evening planning, sketching ideas on napkins and sharing dreams that seemed impossible and inevitable simultaneously. Jin Woo had not felt this kind of creative excitement since college, before success had made him cautious and strategic. With Amara, he remembered what it felt like to believe in changing the world rather than simply profiting from it. The call came at 2 in the morning, Amara's voice shaking with fear that cut through Jin Woo's sleep like broken glass. Grandmother Rose was in the emergency room, her heart struggling with rhythms that the doctors could not stabilize. Jin Woo was dressed and out the door before Amara finished explaining, driving through empty streets with urgency that surprised him with its intensity. He found Amara in the hospital waiting room, still wearing her diner uniform, her hands trembling as she filled out forms with insurance information that would never cover the full cost of emergency cardiac care. Her usual composure had cracked, revealing the terrified granddaughter underneath the strong woman she had always appeared to be. Jin Woo sat beside her without speaking, offering his presence since words seemed inadequate. After an hour of terrible waiting, Amara finally broke down completely, sobbing into his shoulder with grief that shook her entire body. "I cannot lose her," she whispered against his shirt. "She is all the family I have left. She raised me when my parents could not. She taught me everything about being strong and kind and faithful. I do not know how to exist in a world without her." Jin Woo held her carefully, understanding that this was about more than medical crisis. Grandmother Rose represented everything good that Amara had learned about life. She was living proof that poverty did not have to mean spiritual bankruptcy, that kindness was possible even when resources were scarce. "She is not gone," Jin Woo murmured into her hair, breathing in the scent of coffee and cleaning supplies that had become his definition of comfort. "And even if something happens, everything she taught you lives in who you are. I see her strength in you every day." When Amara lifted her face to look at him, her eyes were red with tears, but filled with something that made his breath catch. Before either of them could think about appropriateness or timing, she kissed him with desperate gratitude and something deeper that neither was ready to name. The kiss lasted only seconds, but Jin Woo felt the world shift around them. This was not the calculated romance he had shared with Elena, built on mutual social advancement. This was connection forged in crisis, tested by vulnerability, deepened by shared purpose. They separated reluctantly when the doctor appeared with news that Grandmother Rose was stable but would need several days of monitoring. As they walked to her room together, Jin Woo understood that everything had changed between them, though neither was ready to discuss what that change might mean. Grandmother Rose looked tiny in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped reassurance about heart rhythms and oxygen levels. But her eyes were alert and knowing when she saw Jin Woo and Amara enter together, their hands unconsciously intertwined. "So you finally stopped pretending you are just friends," she observed with the dry humor that had sustained her through decades of hardship. "Grandmother, this is not the time," Amara protested, but her grandmother waved away the objection. "Child, when you get to be my age, you realize that any time might be the last time. If you care about this man, and he cares about you, then stop wasting days pretending otherwise." The wisdom was typically direct and typically accurate. Jin Woo had spent weeks telling himself that his feelings for Amara were gratitude or admiration or anything other than the growing love that threatened to remake his understanding of what mattered in life. Over the next 3 days, as Grandmother Rose recovered, Jin Woo and Amara took turns keeping vigil. They talked about everything except the kiss that had changed the air between them, focusing instead on plans for their social impact company and dreams for community development. It was during one of these conversations that Elena Chun appeared in the hospital corridor like a well-dressed nightmare from his former life. She wore designer clothes and perfect makeup, everything calculated to remind Jin Woo of the world he had lost and could potentially reclaim. Jin Woo, darling, Elena said, her voice carrying the same practiced warmth she had used during their engagement. I have been looking everywhere for you. We need to talk about the future. We have nothing to discuss, Jin Woo replied coolly, but Elena continued as if he had not spoken. Marcus and I have been reconsidering our position. With the right legal agreements, we could restore everything to the way it was before. Your company, your reputation, even our engagement. All you have to do is walk away from whatever this is. Elena's gaze swept over Amara with calculated disdain, taking in the modest clothes and tired face of someone who worked 3 jobs. Amara stiffened beside Jin Woo, and he felt her beginning to retreat into the protective shell she had built around her heart. Elena's presence was poison in the healing space they had created together. The answer is no, Jin Woo said firmly. I am not interested in reclaiming my old life. Do not be ridiculous, Elena laughed, the sound sharp and artificial. Look at yourself. You are wearing clothes from discount stores and working as manual labor. This woman has reduced you to nothing. She has shown me what everything actually means, Jin Woo replied, his voice carrying steel that Elena had never heard before. You and Marcus stole my company, not my future. I am building something better than what I lost. Elena's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Jin Woo, be realistic. You think this little charity project will satisfy you? You think this woman can understand the pressures of real wealth, real power? She will never fit into your actual world. The words hit their target with precision Elena had spent years learning to achieve. Jin Woo felt Amara flinch beside him, saw doubt creep into her expression like shadow across sunlight. My actual world was empty, Jin Woo said quietly. The only thing I accomplished was accumulating money while contributing nothing to anyone's welfare. If Amara does not fit into that world, then I need a different world. Elena studied both of them for a long moment, recognizing that her usual manipulations were not working. Very well, she said finally. But when you realize what you are giving up for a fantasy that will never last, do not expect me to offer this opportunity again. As Elena's heels clicked away down the hospital corridor, Jin Woo turned to find Amara staring at him with eyes that held too much pain and too much doubt. She is right about one thing, Amara said softly. I will never fit into your real world. Board meetings and charity galas, and people who judge worth by bank account balances. What happens when you remember what you actually want from life? The question hung between them like a challenge, demanding honesty that neither was sure they were ready for. Jin Woo reached for Amara's hand, feeling her fingers trembling against his palm. What I want from life is standing right here, he said simply. Everything else is just details we can figure out together. But even as he spoke the words, Jin Woo could see that Elena had planted seeds of doubt that would take time to uproot. Amara had been hurt before by wealthy men who promised her the world and delivered only exploitation. Trust, once broken, required more than words to repair. That evening, as they sat with Grandmother Rose and discussed discharge plans, Jin Woo realized that his real test was just beginning. Elena represented the easy path back to familiar territory. Amara represented the unknown journey toward becoming someone better than he had ever been before. The choice was obvious, but choices and their consequences were different things entirely. As he watched Amara adjust Grandmother Rose's pillows with infinite gentleness, Jin Woo understood that proving his commitment would require more than declarations of love. It would require building a life worthy of the trust she was afraid to give him. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when 3 of the companies Jin Woo had convinced to hire from their employment program suddenly canceled their contracts. Professional, apologetic phone calls that all used remarkably similar language about restructuring priorities and budget constraints. Jin Woo sat in the coffee shop that had become his unofficial office, staring at his laptop screen as email after email delivered variations of the same message. Companies that had enthusiastically embraced his social impact hiring initiative were now backing away with suspicious coordination. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop playing social worker or things get worse for everyone you care about." The message sent ice through Jin Woo's veins. Marcus Thompson was not content with having stolen his original company. Now his former partner was systematically destroying the new life Jin Woo was building, targeting the vulnerable people who had begun to depend on the opportunities he had created. When Amara arrived for their usual afternoon planning session, she found Jin Woo staring at his phone with an expression that made her stomach clench with familiar dread. "What happened?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from him. "Marcus is sabotaging the employment program," Jin Woo said quietly. "He is threatening my contacts, pressuring them to withdraw support. 3 companies canceled today." Amara felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. People were depending on those jobs. Mrs. Patterson's son had already given notice at his old position to start the new one next week. "There is more," Jin Woo continued, his voice carefully controlled. "I think he might be targeting you directly now." The words hung between them like a loaded weapon. Amara had been feeling watched lately, catching glimpses of the same car parked near the diner too many times to be coincidence. Anonymous phone calls to her apartment that ended when she answered. Small things that could be explained away individually but felt threatening in accumulation. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Amara looked at the screen and felt her blood turn cold. "Pretty black girls who steal other people's men sometimes have accidents. Walk away while you still can." Jin Woo saw her face go pale and reached for her phone before she could protest. When he read the message, his jaw tightened with rage that transformed his features into something she had never seen before. "This ends now," he said, standing abruptly. "I am going to call the police, hire security, do whatever it takes to protect you." "No," Amara said quietly. "You are going to walk away." The words hit Jin Woo like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? Elena was right about one thing. I do not belong in your world, and your world will never stop trying to destroy me for being in it." Amara's voice carried a resignation that broke Jin Woo's heart. "I have seen this before. Powerful people who cannot accept losing always escalate until someone gets hurt. So your solution is to give them what they want." Jin Woo's voice rose with frustration and fear. "My solution is to protect the people I love." Amara gathered her things with movements that seemed too calm, too controlled. "Grandmother Rose does not need the stress of worrying about threats. The people in our employment program do not deserve to lose opportunities because I fell in love with the wrong person." "I am not the wrong person," Jin Woo said desperately. "And you are not giving up on us because of threats from cowards who hide behind anonymous messages." But Amara was already standing, her decision made with the same practical efficiency she brought to every crisis in her life. "Take care of yourself, Jin Woo. Find someone who fits into your world without making it dangerous." As she walked away, Jin Woo felt something inside him collapse. This was exactly what Marcus wanted, exactly what Elena had predicted. The woman he loved was walking away to protect him, and he was sitting in a coffee shop feeling helpless and sorry for himself. Just like he had always done when relationships became complicated. Just like he had done his entire life when faced with emotional challenges that could not be solved through strategic planning and market analysis. That evening, Jin Woo found himself back in his penthouse for the first time in weeks, staring out at the city lights that no longer impressed him. His first instinct was to retreat, to accept that some battles could not be won, that some happiness was not worth the cost of fighting for it. His phone rang with a call from his former lawyer, offering updates on legal strategies for reclaiming his stolen assets. For a moment, Jin Woo considered it. He could rebuild his empire, hire enough security to make threats meaningless, create a life where he was too powerful for Marcus Thompson to touch. But even as he entertained the fantasy, Jin Woo knew it would mean becoming someone who deserved to lose Amara. The kind of man who solved problems through domination rather than connection, who protected himself by staying above rather than among the people he claimed to care about. Meanwhile, across the city, Amara sat with Grandmother Rose in their small apartment, trying to explain why she had ended the best thing that had ever happened to her. "You are making a mistake, child," Grandmother Rose said with the blunt honesty that had guided Amara through every major decision of her life. I am protecting us, Amara replied. These people have resources we cannot fight. Money, connections, lawyers who specialize in making problems disappear. So you think the solution is to disappear yourself? Grandmother Rose leaned forward in her chair, fixing Amara with eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize wisdom from fear. That man loves you, genuinely loves you. Do you know how rare that is? Love is not always enough, grandmother. No, but it is always worth fighting for. Grandmother Rose reached for Amara's hands, holding them with fingers that trembled slightly, but gripped with surprising strength. I raised you to be brave, not careful. Being careful keeps you alive, but being brave makes life worth living. The conversation continued past midnight, Grandmother Rose sharing stories about her own youth, times when she had chosen safety over possibility and regretted it for years afterward. Love, she insisted, was the one thing worth taking risks for, because without it, security was just another word for loneliness. The next morning, Amara made her decision. Instead of hiding, she would face the threats directly. She called the number that had sent the anonymous message and waited for someone to answer. We need to talk, she said when Marcus Thompson's voice came through the phone. I think we are finished talking, Miss Williams. The time for conversation has passed. Then let me be clear about something, Mr. Thompson. I am not Elena Chen. I do not intimidate easily, and I do not run from bullies who hide behind lawyers and anonymous threats. Amara's voice carried steel that surprised even her with its strength. If you want me gone, you will have to do better than text messages and vague warnings. The line was quiet for a long moment before Marcus replied. You have no idea what you are dealing with. I know exactly what I am dealing with, Amara said calmly. A man who is so afraid of losing control that he targets innocent people to maintain power he stole in the first place. The question is whether you know what you are dealing with. She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding, but her resolve crystallized into something unbreakable. Marcus Thompson thought he understood her because he had reduced her to stereotypes and assumptions. He expected her to be victim or gold digger, either frightened into submission or bought off with threats to her security. He had not expected her to fight back with intelligence and courage that matched his manipulation with moral clarity he could not counter. When Jin Woo received Amara's call explaining her confrontation with Marcus, he felt pride and terror in equal measure. This woman, who owed him nothing and could have safely walked away, was choosing to stand and fight for their future together. We do this as partners, Jin Woo said when they met that evening at Murphy's Diner. No more protecting each other by walking away. We face whatever comes next together. Together, Amara agreed, and the word carried weight of commitment that went far beyond romantic declarations. They spent the night planning their counterattack, using Jin Woo's understanding of corporate vulnerabilities and Amara's insight into community organizing to create a strategy that Marcus would not anticipate. Instead of fighting his power directly, they would expose his methods publicly, turning his shadowy threats into transparent manipulation that could not survive daylight. Jin Woo called a press conference for the following week, announcing the launch of their social impact company with Amara as his equal partner and co-founder. The announcement would make their relationship public, make her a target for anyone who wanted to hurt him, but it would also make their mission visible in ways that would be difficult to sabotage quietly. The night before the press conference, they sat in Amara's apartment with Grandmother Rose, who was now recovering steadily and insisting on attending the public launch to show support for her granddaughter's courage. I am scared, Amara admitted as they reviewed their prepared statements. Not of Marcus or Elena or anyone else who might try to destroy what we are building. I am scared that I am not strong enough to be the partner you need for something this big. Jin Woo took her hands in his, marveling at how such gentle fingers could carry so much strength. A month ago, I was a man who thought strength meant never needing anyone else. You have taught me that real strength means being brave enough to need people, to fight for them, to build something larger than yourself. He kissed her then, not with the desperate passion of crisis, but with steady certainty that spoke of futures planned together and challenges faced as allies. When they separated, Amara's eyes held no more doubt, only determination that matched his own. The press conference the next day drew more attention than either had expected. Business reporters curious about Jean Wu's fall from grace, community advocates interested in employment justice, and social media personalities attracted by the dramatic romance between the billionaire and the cleaner. Jean Wu spoke first, explaining their mission to create meaningful employment opportunities for underserved communities. Then Amara took the microphone, and her words carried the authenticity that no amount of media training could manufacture. Everyone deserves the dignity of work that feeds their families and honors their capabilities, she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room. This company exists to prove that social justice and business success are not contradictions. They are partnerships waiting to be formed. As the questions began, Jean Wu realized that Amara commanded the room with natural authority that came from genuine conviction rather than practiced performance. She fielded inquiries about funding, scalability, and social impact with intelligence that surprised reporters who had expected to interview a charity case rather than a co-founder. Marcus Thompson and Elena Chun were notably absent from the supportive crowd, but Jean Wu knew they would be watching from wherever people like them watched when their manipulations were exposed to public scrutiny. That evening, as they celebrated with Grandmother Rose and friends from the diner, Jean Wu understood that they had won something more important than a battle against specific enemies. They had chosen each other despite every logical reason to walk away, chosen love despite the costs it might require, chosen to build something together that neither could have achieved alone. The threats would probably continue, the challenges would certainly multiply, but Jean Wu and Amara now faced them as true partners who had been tested by crisis and emerged stronger than the sum of their individual strengths. 6 months after the press conference that had changed everything, Amara Williams Park stood in the lobby of their newly opened Community Advancement Center, watching Jean Wu explain employment matching algorithms to a group of college students. The building hummed with purposeful energy, voices discussing job training programs mixing with the sounds of children in the daycare center they had built for working parents. Their company, Bridges Employment Solutions, now operated in 12 cities across 3 countries. What had begun as Jean Wu's attempt to help a few people from Murphy's Diner had evolved into a comprehensive platform connecting underemployed workers with businesses committed to social responsibility and fair wages. Jean Wu caught her eye across the busy lobby and smiled with the same warmth that had sustained them through 6 months of 18-hour workdays, skeptical investors, and the countless growing pains of building something entirely new. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his expensive suits relegated to the back of his closet like artifacts from another life. "How did the university meeting go?" he asked, joining her near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the neighborhood they had chosen specifically because it needed investment rather than displacement. "They approved my thesis proposal," Amara replied, unable to suppress the grin that spread across her face. "Full scholarship for the social work graduate program, with the understanding that my research will focus on employment barriers in underserved communities." Jean Wu lifted her off her feet in a celebratory hug that drew amused looks from nearby staff members who had grown accustomed to their displays of mutual support and affection. After months of careful balance between professional partnership and personal relationship, they had learned to integrate both aspects of their connection seamlessly. "Dr. Amara Williams has a nice sound to it," Jean Wu murmured against her ear, setting her down gently, but keeping his arms around her waist. "Dr. Amara Williams Park," she corrected with mock seriousness. "We discussed this. Hyphenated names for the modern power couple." The wedding planning had been an education in cultural fusion that neither had anticipated. Jean Wu's Korean family traditions, which he had discovered through research since his own parents had assimilated so completely into American business culture, needed to harmonize with Amara's African-American church community and Grandmother Rose's very specific opinions about appropriate ceremony elements. They had settled on a celebration that would begin with traditional Korean tea ceremonies honoring their elders, continue with Christian wedding vows that satisfied Grandmother Rose's spiritual requirements, and conclude with a reception featuring foods from both cultures prepared by cooks from their community programs. "Speaking of the wedding," Amara said, pulling away slightly to study Jean Wu's expression, "Grandmother Rose wants to know if your parents have confirmed their attendance." The question carried weight beyond simple guest list management. Jinwoo's parents had been initially horrified by their son's fall from financial grace, then cautiously optimistic about his media attention and new company success, and finally bewildered by his choice to marry someone they considered beneath his social status. "They will be there," Jinwoo said carefully. "My mother actually called this morning to ask about Korean wedding dress traditions for Amara. I think she is trying to understand rather than just disapprove." Progress was progress, even when it came in small increments measured by tentative acceptance rather than enthusiastic embrace. Amara had long since stopped expecting Jinwoo's family to love her the way Grandmother Rose had immediately adopted him as another grandson to spoil and advise. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to the community center, former clients stopping by to share good news about promotions and successful training program completions, local business owners discussing partnership opportunities, reporters following up on the success stories that had made their model a template being studied by urban development programs nationwide. But the most satisfying visitor was Marcus Thompson's former assistant, who arrived near closing time with a story that made both Jinwoo and Amara understand how completely their former adversary had destroyed himself. "Mr. Thompson and Ms. Chun are facing federal investigation for securities fraud," the woman explained, her voice carrying satisfaction she did not attempt to hide. "Turns out their method of stealing companies involved several illegal practices that the SEC takes very seriously." "What about the people they hurt?" Amara asked, thinking about employees who had lost jobs when companies were gutted for parts. "Class action lawsuits have recovered most of the pension funds and severance payments they stole. Mr. Thompson lost his assets to legal fees and damage settlements. Ms. Chun fled to Hong Kong, but she cannot return to the United States without facing arrest warrants." Justice, served by consequences rather than revenge, felt appropriately satisfying. Jinwoo and Amara had focused their energy on building rather than destroying, creating rather than punishing, and their former enemies had eliminated themselves through their own greed and illegal methods. As evening approached and the center emptied except for security staff, Jinwoo and Amara walked through the quiet spaces they had designed together. The job training classrooms where people learned new skills in supportive environments. The childcare facility that allowed single parents to pursue education without choosing between advancement and family responsibilities. The small business incubator where entrepreneurs from their community programs could test ideas with mentorship and microfunding. "Do you ever think about what your life would have looked like if Elena and Marcus had never betrayed you?" Amara asked as they paused in the main conference room where they held their weekly community meetings. Jinwoo considered the question seriously, looking out at the neighborhood lights that represented families whose lives had been touched by their work in some small way. "I would probably still be alone in that penthouse, accumulating wealth while contributing nothing meaningful to anyone's welfare. I would have married Elena for strategic reasons and spent my life wondering why success felt so empty. And I would still be working 3 jobs, dreaming about college but never finding the time or resources to make it happen," Amara added thoughtfully. "We saved each other from lives that looked acceptable from the outside but felt hollow on the inside." Their reflection was interrupted by Jinwoo's phone buzzing with a text from Grandmother Rose, asking when they would be home for dinner and reminding them that she had made their favorite meal to celebrate Amara's acceptance into graduate school. Home was now the apartment they shared 3 blocks from the center, chosen for its proximity to work and to Grandmother Rose, who had her own unit in the same building but spent most evenings cooking for her expanded family of 2 overworked idealists and their frequent guests. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think about your answer honestly," Amara said as they locked up the center and walked toward home. "Do you ever miss the luxury? The penthouse, the expensive cars, the sense that money could solve any problem?" Jinwoo stopped walking and turned to face her directly, understanding that behind the casual question lay deeper concerns about whether he would eventually regret choosing love over wealth. "I miss the simplicity of problems that could be solved with money," he said honestly. "But I have never missed feeling like I was living someone else's definition of success. Everything I have now, I chose deliberately. The work feels meaningful. Our relationship is real. The community we have built together matters to people beyond ourselves." For a moment, Amara saw him as he had been 6 months earlier, broken and desperate in his empty penthouse. Then she looked at him as he was now, tired from fulfilling work, excited about plans they were making together, surrounded by people who valued him for his character rather than his bank balance. I wonder if any of you watching tonight have experienced something similar, she mused, though she was really speaking to Jean Wu. Have you ever had your life completely change because someone saw your potential instead of your problems? Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place, with someone who challenged everything you thought you wanted? Jean Wu smiled at her habit of occasionally addressing an invisible audience when she was processing important thoughts. It was one of the quirks that made her uniquely herself, like her tendency to hum when she was concentrating or her insistence on feeding anyone who seemed hungry regardless of their ability to reciprocate. Their wedding took place on a perfect September day that felt orchestrated by forces beyond their control. Grandmother Rose had recovered completely from her cardiac episode and served as Amara's matron of honor with dignity that reduced half the congregation to tears. Jean Wu's parents had flown in from California and surprised everyone by embracing Amara with genuine warmth and presenting her with family jewelry that made their acceptance official. The ceremony itself blended traditions in ways that honored both their backgrounds while creating something entirely new. Jean Wu's family performed traditional Korean bowing ceremonies that acknowledged Amara as a daughter rather than just a daughter-in-law. Amara's church family surrounded them with gospel music that lifted the roof and reminded everyone present that love was indeed a gift from higher powers. But the most memorable moment came during their personal vows, written separately, but expressing similar gratitude for lives that had been transformed by unexpected grace. 6 months ago, I thought I had lost everything that mattered, Jean Wu said, his voice carrying across the packed sanctuary. What I actually lost was everything that was keeping me from becoming the person I was meant to be. Amara, you showed me that real wealth is measured in relationships. Real power comes from service, and real love exists when someone sees your worst self and chooses to help you become your best self. Amara's response reduced the congregation to reverent silence. Jean Wu taught me that sometimes the person who changes your life forever appears when you least expect it and need it most. He showed me that generosity is not about giving from abundance, but sharing whatever you have with someone who needs it. Most importantly, he proved that love is not about finding someone perfect, but finding someone perfect for the work you are meant to do together. As they exchanged rings and kissed while rice and flower petals fell like blessings around them, Jean Wu and Amara understood that they were beginning something larger than marriage. They were continuing a partnership that had already changed dozens of lives and would continue expanding in ways they could not yet imagine. The reception continued late into the evening, with toasts from former diner customers, business partners from their employment program, and family members who had traveled across continents to witness love that had overcome every obstacle society could construct. Near midnight, as the celebration wound down and guests began departing with promises to visit soon, Jean Wu and Amara stood together in the church fellowship hall surrounded by the debris of perfect happiness. Centerpieces wilting gracefully, cake crumbs on empty tables, children asleep in their parents' arms. So what happens next? Amara asked, leaning against Jean Wu's shoulder with exhaustion that felt earned and satisfying. We wake up tomorrow and keep building, Jean Wu replied, wrapping his arms around his wife and partner and best friend. We help more people find meaningful work. You finish your doctorate. I learn whatever you teach me about making the world more just. We figure out how to have children while running a social impact company. We grow old together while staying young enough to believe we can change everything. It sounded like the most beautiful life either of them could imagine. Not perfect, but purposeful. Not easy, but worth every challenge they would face together. As they drove home through quiet streets toward the apartment they shared with Grandmother Rose and the lives they had built from the ashes of everything they had lost, Amara and Jean Wu understood that they had discovered something rare and precious. Love that had been tested by crisis and emerged stronger. Partnership that balanced individual strengths while creating something greater than either could achieve alone. Purpose that connected their personal happiness to the welfare of their community. They had learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you were actually looking for all along. And sometimes the person who saves your life is someone you met on the worst day you ever experienced, someone who saw past your circumstances to your potential, Someone who chose to stay when every rational reason argued for walking away. Behind them, the city lights gradually dimmed as responsible people settled into homes and dreams. Ahead of them, morning would bring new challenges and opportunities to serve others while building the life they had chosen together. In between, they had this moment of perfect contentment, driving through their adopted neighborhood toward tomorrow's possibilities, certain only that whatever came next, they would face it as they had learned to face everything else, together.